So when Islam really rose to power, it rose to power very, very quickly. Now you have the traditional story of Islam, and then you have what the archaeological documentary manuscript record is telling us. And there's some difference between those two records. But according to the traditional story of Islam, this is what the Muslim texts say happened. You have Muhammad, who was their prophet. Around 632, he dies. Then they believe that by about 650, 652, you have the whole Quran, apparently has been given to Muhammad, then compiled by his companions. You have the whole Quran. It was sent out to different cities like Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and so on, Cairo, etc. And those whole copies, Muslims claim, exist till today. Now, we actually know that isn't true because we have 6 early copies, the earliest Qurans that we can find today, and they differ from the Quran that's used by Muslims around the world. That's another topic for another day. But the idea from Islam is that there was this religion that was intact. By 632, Muhammad dies. 650, 52, Qurans are in place. And then Islam spread by conversion is really a story you hear a lot from Muslim pundits, from Muslim scholars. And all my Muslim friends would say the same. Unfortunately, if they start reading their own histories, so you have a lot of Islamic literature you can go to. You can go to the Quran itself, but that doesn't give you much detail of the spread of Islam. You have to go to the sayings and some of the sayings and ideas and practices of Muhammad. Those are found in a book or volumes of books called the Hadith. You have to go to the Sirah Rasulullah, which is the biography of Muhammad, and there's quite a few different versions of those in the first centuries of Islam. You have to go to the tafsir, which are the commentaries of the Quran, and then you go to the tariq, which are the histories of the Quran, and finally Islamic law. And it's through all this whole different genres of literature, you get a fuller picture of the early sort of 500-600 years of Islam. And a lot of that literature exists from about the 9th to the 14th century. And so to understand Islam from Muslim perspective, from early Islamic scholars, you go to those genres of literature. And if you read them, especially the histories and the exegetes of the Quran, the tafsir, you come to a different picture than what modern Muslims often claim about what happened. And again, especially if you look at the life of Muhammad, starting with him, because he is the sort of the foundational role model that Muslims need to go back to, according to what the Quran says, to obey him as well as to obey Allah. He was a man of war. And his original stories, his original biographies are actually called Maghazi, which means raids or raiding. And so as a raider, he would go out with his men, and all the generations following him went out conquering the worlds that they went into. And today that would be sort of what we call the 1040 window in missions to Muslims, that sort of central part of the world where a lot of Islam still holds in its grip today. And you'll find that if you read their stories, even their own stories show in a way that's almost communicated in a matter of pride, with pride, that the enemies of Islam were destroyed, were conquered, were made dhimma or dhimmis to be under Muslims. And you find that Muslims had a second status. So if you look at the Islamic law, which is implemented today in many Muslim societies, a dhimmi, that's the anglicized version of dhimma in the Arabic. A dhimmi is a non-Muslim living under Islam, and we had second status. We weren't allowed to have our houses taller than a Muslim. If we paid the tax in order to preserve our life from our Muslim rulers, so that they wouldn't kill us, we had to pay it in humiliation. If you read the Hanbali law, school of law, there's different schools of law. It teaches that we had to we had to give it, and we were not treated well as people were to give it to the give their tax to the Muslim leaders. So this idea that Islam brought about peace and that it treated non-Muslims well, again, is not supported in both the Islamic literature, in the Islamic law, which is to be implemented today according to traditional Islam, and in the witnesses outside of Islam who are writing about their experiences living under Islamic rule.